shed for you. Take and drink. When's the last time you heard the social justice issues of AIDS connected with the blood? Don't y'all always sing, I know it was the blood? And there are people in our sanctuaries who are saying, yes, it is the blood that is killing me. So how does then the blood ritual give us a glimpse of glory to say something about healing, even if not fully in this realm, healing that can come in the next realm, and healing that we can enjoy at least some modicum of now? Finally, well, let me give you the James Brown on that to make sure you got it. When I get to heaven, gonna sing and shout. Won't be nobody there to put me out. So that our worship experiences down here should prepare us for the fullness of worship up there at the levels of power and justice and creativity. Finally, worship as soul cleansing power. Soul cleansing power. What worship does in its best moments is in that wonderful word that comes from another song in our tradition. Fix me, Jesus. Fix me. Worship is an opportunity as we gather together as a community for Jesus, through the power of the Holy Ghost, to fix us. And even if the problem isn't fixed, we can be fixed to better encounter the problem. Fix me, Jesus. Fix me. But here's the challenge, and this is why this resource should be used in every Christian community, not just the African American as far as I'm concerned, is that far too many people are going to churches and they want to say, fix me, and they find themselves being further broken by what happens in worship.
Right.
My wife says all the time that there needs to be a homiletic police. She is a highly educated woman with an MBA running her own company. And she says she does not have the capacity anymore for dull worship and soft-minded preaching. And often, those of us who are in leadership think we're getting over on folk, and folk realize their pain is too real for us to play with. People are saying, fix me, Jesus. Fix me. And as sure as you and I are born to die, the African American lectionary is all the antidote you need in many instances to at least begin moving folk in the right direction to more transformative ministry. Let me ask, are there any questions you have about what I wanted to say about worship? Right? How can you talk about African American worship in 8 minutes? Right? I know I did it in a very rapid way, but again, I want you to have some things to hold on to, because you need to become better interpreters of worship. Because one of the things we don't do enough in the African American tradition is we haven't developed enough the ability for generous self-critique. Often bad worship occurs because folk in the pews allow bad worship to occur, rather than saying we can do better because we need to do better. What questions do you have for me about my thoughts around worship? And then we'll show how this works in this resource. Am I being clear? You don't have to agree with the thing I say. I just need to be clear. That's my only responsibility as a teacher. Dr. Tripp.
I was hoping you'd say just a little bit more about your wife's critique of of struggling preaching. As you talked about that, I thought about the Dean of African American Preaching, or of American Preaching, Dr. Gardner Taylor, and one of the things that his wife said to him at a point that he was thinking about running for political office. She said to him, Doc, your preaching's getting mighty thin. You need to focus on your preaching. And I was wondering, because you our preacher and your wife listens to preaching probably with a more critical ear than many. If you could say just a little bit more about that, and that may help some of us get into study a little bit more.
Absolutely. I'd be delighted to do that. And I tell you, I think the real payoff for this will come in the section down toward the end. So may I just kind of forestall that? Because I think what I mean by a thick approach to preaching will emerge maybe in a more organic way in just a moment. And if I don't address that appropriately, Dr. Tripp will hold me accountable, and I'll keep digging until I give you the answer you need.
Just a quick question, Carol.
Yes.
The pastor in church, you know how much time that takes, but also becomes a political, have an office, a political office.
Yes.
I would just like to know how you look at that, and if that is, the preaching has suffered, and so, and our congregations are just what you just stated, are just letting it ride, or just not saying anything, don't want to push the envelope, So if you could speak, and that may come at the end, is where you were going to speak to that, so
yes.
If you could just kind of keep that in mind.
I will definitely keep that in mind and say that, and part of that is just very quickly, that's almost a pastoral issue. That is to say, how can the congregation and the pastor discern and use its resources to free up whatever additional little time there may be, so that that particular pastor can lean more heavily into the office of preacher, into that responsibility? Because I don't want to stand here and say you shouldn't do that. If the Lord has given to that particular pastor that kind of ministry, then how does the church and that pastor and that pastor's family think creatively to free up time and to empower others? Because in a church of any size, any church, there ought not be just one person who has a word as well. So what are the ways? So that's a pastoral issue and a congregational issue. How do we think creatively? Because good preaching takes time. It takes a lot of time. And how do we then become better stewards of our resources to make that happen? Okay. Let me now then talk about the African American lectionary, because it's in this framework of the genius of black preaching and the genius of black worship that the genius of the African American lectionary can be best understood. You have in front of you, if you could go to the site just for a moment, thank you. You have in front of you the commentary for Watch Night, Year 1, the cultural resources for Watch Night, Year 1, and the worship resources for Watch Night. So let's just talk for a minute about what is actually happening with a resource of this nature. Because they have the resources, so if we don't have the connectivity, that's fine. When we put this resource together, there were at least 4 things that we were driving after. At least. Many more than that, but at least 4. When you go on the site, you're going to recognize these 4 things. The first one, and please write this down, the first one is theology. That in this moment, in black church life, we need to make sure that our theological muscles are as strong as ever. You don't make it from the hulls of slave ship to the White House like we have done without a thick theology and understanding of God. And I will say now, as one who loves black preaching in particular and preaching in general, I'm very afraid of some things that are happening in the African American pulpit right now, because some of the theology is thin. So this resource is designed to ask this question: who is God? And the first thing we learn about God from Scripture is what? Is that God is what? Creative. God is creative. And what you will discover when you go on this lectionary, it will take you months, years to fathom all of its parts, is how utterly creative it is. First of all, just the colors, right? The website is visually appealing. And what we're trying to do is to fire your imagination to think about how to preach with color and vibrancy. and energy. Who is God? God is creative. Second of all, anthropology. Another divinity school word, anthropology. All it really means is who we are as people. Who we are as people. Who are we as people? The lectionary reminds us, as I said a moment ago, that people's will needs to be transformed. So I'll give you an example. Do we have the connectivity? Okay, I'll just talk about it. Because here, let me just say this too. This is a great moment to talk this thing up. I am not against at all technology, but the beauty of African American worship and preaching is that when it's done right, inherently, it is a multidimensional presentation in the first place. Because the ways we use our bodies and the ways we use intonation and the like. I'm teaching a graduate course last night at McCormick Seminary, and I talk about the lectionary and how culture impacts the selection of text. And what you will discover on the Watch Night site is when you go into the cultural resources, the worship resources, you will have, and this is the brilliance of Nolan Williams, and Michelle, and others who've done this, there is actually an audio clip from a Works Project Administration interview with a former slave. Who are we? We are visual people. We are auditory people. And last night in that classroom, there was a very engaged young woman seminarian who had never heard of Watch Night. She did not know. She was from a culture that knew nothing about the service. And so those of us who are children of the sun told her about Watch Night. And we're going to take her on a field trip here in a few months to Watch Night down at Trinity UCC. And as we talked about that, eager waiting, December 31, 1862, we know that the ink on the Emancipation Proclamation was just about to be written on that parchment, and slaves about to be emancipated forever. And in, oh, I feel it coming, y'all. I feel it, I feel it, I feel it. And in that moment, because even as Lincoln wrote that with his quill, it actually was signed, as I say in my commentary, with the blood of folks fighting in the Civil War. Isn't it interesting? Civil War, states' rights, Tea Party, states. Y'all will get that later. Y'all get that. People fighting and breaking up a nation to keep the rights of a state in order to keep people enslaved. If I had some preachers in here, somebody just got freed up to do some work on Sunday morning about the ways in which watching and waiting for justice is still a relevant.
Yes, it is.
Preach, Reverend.
And so in that moment, last night in the classroom, rather than work like I just worked, although I did that work, at one point I just said, let the elders speak. And we put on the clip of that slave who says that rather than go back into slavery.
We hope we can play it.
Okay, I hope so. He would just get a gun.
And end it.
And end it. And then once his voice trailed off, because there is some preaching somewhere in my bones, then what I did is I said to the class, can't you hear Jesus say, if the Son sets you free, you are
Right now.
free indeed. And then anybody who's a preacher in here would begin then to talk about the ways in which, even with a brown-skinned brother in the White House, we still find ourselves enslaved. Do we not need to have a watch night? Not just December 31 coming up, but is not every night in some urban community I ain't got no preachers in here today. Anybody helping me? It's a watch night. And then Nolan Williams does the thing that he does, and they say, watchmen, tell me of the night. How long must we wait for justice? And then the preaching and the culture. Then you go in and you dig in all that rich stuff that Bernice Johnson Reagan has given us about what was in Lincoln's mind, because we talk all that stuff about he was trying to free the slaves. That's a lie from the pit of hell. The Union was losing the war, and he needed black bodies to help him win. The country is losing a war. We need